Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. And this is July 21st, right? 2012. It's the birth anniversary of my teacher, actually, one of my teachers, Venerable Nyanaponika Mahatera, who would have been 111 years old today. Yeah? Okay, so today we'll be starting Sutta number 77 in the Majjhima Nikāya. This is called Mahasahaludayi Sutta, the longer discourse to Udayi, or Sakuludayi. Let's get the beginning, and it begins on page 629. Okay, this sutta begins in a very similar way to the sutta that we examined last week, except here it's not Venerable Ananda, but it's the Buddha himself who enters the town a bit too early to go wandering for alms. And here the Buddha is in the bamboo grove. He's staying in the bamboo grove, which is a little bit outside the city of Rajagaha. And so the Buddha decides to go into the city of Rajagaha on his alms round, and probably when he reaches the outskirts of the city, he sees that it's still too early to walk for alms, and so he decides to go to a place called the Peacock's Sanctuary. It must have been a place where peacocks would gather. Not only peacocks, but also wandering ascetics would gather there. Maybe in an earlier time the peacocks gathered there, but then it became attractive to wandering ascetics. And so they would go and gather there and have discussions. Probably they had some pavilions where the ascetics would stay overnight. And so the Buddha approaches, he goes to this wanderer's park, and as in the previous sutta, when the Buddha arrives, this time it's the wanderer Sakuludayi, who's sitting together with a large group of wanderers, and according to the stock passage, how does it go? They are making an uproar, loudly and noisily talking many kinds of pointless talk, such as talk of kings, heroes, some of the other topics. Kings, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, food, battles, food, drink, clothes, some so and so and so on, cities, countries, women's heroes, the origin of the world, the origin of the sea, whether things are so or not so. Okay, then as the Buddha approaches, the wanderer Sakuludayi tells his own assembly to be quiet in the hope that the Buddha will join them. And so the Buddha comes and approaches Sakuludayi. The wanderer Sakuludayi welcomes him, offers him a seat, and then after the Buddha is seated, now we turn the page to 630, the Buddha asks Sakuludayi, "What was the discussion that you were having when I arrived?" And Sakuludayi now tells the Buddha, he says, let be, just put aside the discussion that we were having as we were sitting together. They might have been talking about which king is getting married to the sister of which prince, and so on. And so maybe he's too embarrassed to bring up that subject of conversation in the presence of the Buddha. And so he opens a new topic of discussion. And he says, recently, when recluses and Brahmins of various sects have been gathering together and sitting together, this topic has arisen. And now he's referring to a situation that had occurred at the time. He says, it's a gain for the people of Anga and Magadha. It's a great gain for the people of Anga and Magadha that these recluses and Brahmins, heads of orders, heads of groups, teachers of groups, well-known and famous founders of sects, regarded by many as saints or holy men. I think the word here is sadhu, which is still used in India to designate a saintly person or a holy man. So all of these great teachers have come to spend the rains retreat at Rajagaha. As I've mentioned previously, in the North India has three main climates, or three main seasons. There is the hot season. Well, let's start with the cool season, which starts from November, 4 months, November, December, January, February, till about the first half of March. Then it starts, till about the middle of February. In the middle of February, it starts to warm up and get hotter and hotter, till one comes to the real hot season, which is March, April, May, and June. Then about early July, middle of July, there comes the rainy season, which lasts for 4 months. July, August, September, October. So during the rainy season, especially the 3 months when it's really rainy, July, August, September, till about the middle of October, then it was the tradition for all of the different wandering ascetics, religious spiritual communities, to cease their regular wandering and to settle down for the period of the rainy season. And the Buddha also made this a tradition for the Buddhist monastic order to observe what's called the Vasa, the rains retreat. And so apparently at this time, the Buddha and his own entourage of disciples are spending the rains retreat in Rajagaha at the bamboo grove. And for some reason, one of these, call it auspicious circumstances, all of these other famous teachers have come to Rajagaha to spend the rainy season. And so we have here now, the text is going to mention what are called the 6 famous teachers of the period. These are the 6 teachers who were the rivals of the Buddha, so to speak. So he mentions first, there's Purana Kassapa. We mentioned him last week. He was the one who taught the doctrine of non-doing, that even if one goes slaying everybody on one side of the river Ganges, one doesn't commit any evil. And if one goes on the other side giving gifts, promoting the welfare of the people, one doesn't do any merit. Okay, then there is Makali Gosala. He was the founder of the sect called the Ajivakas. And he taught a kind of doctrine of fatalism, that everything is predetermined, predestined, including bondage and liberation. Then there's Ajita Kesakambali. He was the one who taught the materialistic doctrine that the person, when the person passes away, the four elements break up and dissolve, and there's no continuation of consciousness beyond death. Then Pakuda Kachayana, who taught the doctrine of the 7 elements or 7 bodies that I spoke about last week. Sanjaya Belatiputta, who was something of a skeptic, who believed that it was not possible for human beings to arrive at any kind of definite understanding of truth. And then there was Niganta Nataputta, who is also known as Mahavira. He is the historical, let us say, the great teacher of Jainism. Okay, so all of these teachers were present around in the vicinity of Rajagaha, and Rajagaha was the capital of the state of Magadha. And so for this reason, many people were saying that it's a great gain for the people of Anga. Anga must have been a bordering province, and Magadha, the central province, that so many great famous teachers have come to live at Rajagaha. Maybe it would be a little bit like in contemporary times if we had rainy season and then maybe the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh. Well, not really that much. Maybe Joseph Goldstein, of course he's not a monastic, but supposing came to live and spend the rainy season at Carmel or Cold Spring. Okay, so those are the 6 rival teachers, and then also, of course, he adds, there is also this recluse Gautama, also the head of an order. The order here is Sangha, the head of a group and so on, the famous teacher of a sect, who's also come to spend the rains at Rajagaha. Okay, so now Sakuludayi raises, or in this discussion being recounted by Sakuludayi, some of them raise the question, some people raise the question, among these worthy recluses and Brahmins who are regarded by many as saints, who is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, and how, when they honor and respect him, do they live in dependence upon him? And I have to confess here that my personal belief is that the discussion that's going to, or the account that's going to follow here, is a little bit like a staged account recorded from the standpoint of the Buddhists in order to depict the other sects in an unfavorable light and then show the Buddhist community, especially the Buddha, in a favorable light. It seems that biases and points of view are endemic to everybody, even venerable Buddhists. Okay, so some say this Purana Kassapa is the head of an order regarded by many as a saint. However, he is not honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his own disciples. Okay, now he's going to cite some evidence for this. Okay, one time Purana Kassapa was teaching his doctrine to an assembly with many hundreds of followers. And then a certain disciple made a noise. And I've seen scenes like this in Sri Lanka as well. Do not ask Purana Kassapa that question. He doesn't know the answer to that, but I know it. Ask me that question and I'll answer it for you. Okay, and so when this took place, then Purana Kassapa got upset, and there was a commotion taking place in the audience, And he waves his arms and he wails and he says, "Be quiet, sirs, don't make any noise. They aren't asking you. They're asking me, and I'm going to answer you." And then many of his disciples got disillusioned with him, and they left him, and they rejected his teaching, saying, "You don't understand your own Dhamma and discipline. We're the ones who understand it," and so on. They contradict him, they argue with him, they dispute with him, and they even dismiss him and say, "Your doctrine is refuted, we've proved you wrong, go and learn better, or disentangle yourself if you can." And so in this way, he concludes that Purana Kassapa wasn't honored and respected, not even by his own disciples. And he's even scorned by the scorn that some have shown, that his own disciples have shown to his Dharma. Okay, so the same thing is repeated about each of the other 5 teachers, Makkhali Gosala through Nigantanataputta. In the case of all of them, their own disciples argue with them, their own disciples think they understand their Dhamma better than they themselves do. But then some say, now they're speaking about the Buddha, who they call the Samana Gautama, the ascetic or recluse Gautama. He's the head of an order, the famous founder of a sect, regarded by many as a holy man. And he is honored, respected, revered, and venerated by his disciples, and his disciples live in dependence on him, honoring and respecting him. And now the speaker is going to bring forth some evidence for this. So he says, once the recluse Gautama was teaching his Dhamma to an assembly of several hundred followers, and then one disciple who was sitting in the audience just happened to clear his throat. He must have had some phlegm in the throat. So he just goes like that. And then one of his fellows, his fellow co-religionists, nudges him with the knee and indicates, in order to indicate, "Be quiet, don't make any noise. The Buddha is teaching us the Dhamma." And so he continues, when the recluse Gautama is teaching the Dhamma to an assembly even of several hundred followers, on that occasion there is no sound of his disciples coughing or clearing their throats. It seems that this coughing and clearing of the throat, it doesn't indicate always that one has a sore throat or a cold, but sometimes it seems to be just an expression of boredom or disinterest in what the speaker is saying. So to distract one's attention, one clears the throat or coughs. It's quiet, okay. Okay, what comes next now is very nice. Okay, for then that large assembly is poised in expectancy. They're quite eager, trying to anticipate what the Buddha is going to say next. They're always thinking, let's hear the Dhamma that the Buddha is about to teach us. Then he uses a quite vivid simile to illustrate this. I don't know if we see this in the US because production of honey usually goes on indoors, but in India it might have been done outside at a crossroads. So suppose there were a man at a crossroads pressing out pure honey, and then a large group of people gathers around him, they're watching him, poised in expectancy, wondering, I guess, when he's pressing the honeycomb, the honey comes dripping out from the comb into a bottle. I don't have experience making honey, but I assume that seems to be what it's suggesting. Anybody have any experience with making honey? Okay, so, but this image is very, very vivid of people just, when is the honey going to come out from the comb? And of course their mouths are watering. Is he going to give us all a taste of the honey? Okay, so too when the ascetic Gautama is teaching the Dhamma to an assembly of several hundred people, on that occasion there is no sound of any coughing or clearing the throats, but everybody is just listening very intently, wondering what's the Buddha going to say next. Okay, then another proof how the Buddha is respected by his followers. Even those disciples of his who fall out with their companions in the holy life, in other words, this is speaking about monks who fall out with fellow monks, and they abandon the training, please forgive this phrase, but abandoning the training to return to the low life. I don't think that's such a good translation, especially in English. Low life suggests like criminals gathering in dark dens in order to plan the next bank robbery or to distribute drugs along the network of amongst the network of drug pushers. But it means to return to the household life. Okay, so when these disciples abandon the monastic training to return to the household life, even they continue to praise the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and instead of finding fault with the Buddha and his teaching, then they usually blame themselves, saying, we were unlucky, we had little merit, we went forth into homelessness in this swakato dhammo, this well-expounded dharma, but we couldn't live the perfect and pure brahmacharya, holy life, through the rest of our lives. And so at least some of them, of course most will, after leaving the monastic life, will marry and become lay followers, undertaking and observing the 5 precepts, but some will stay at the monastery and become monastery attendants, serving the monks, or in the case of women, the nuns. And they continue to, emulate the monastic life to the best of their ability. But whether they become lay followers or monastery attendants, they continue to honor, respect, and revere the Buddha and his Dhamma. I mean, I've seen this in my own experience. I've known many who have been monks in Sri Lanka, elsewhere, and then for various reasons they leave the monastic life to return to lay life, but just about everybody that I know continues to remain as followers of the Buddha, and they revere the Buddha, and even look back to their days as monks thinking, oh, that was the happiest period of my life. Oh, I was so happy and joyful in that period. But just through, the play of conditions and my own karma, my own merits were not strong enough, so I couldn't continue. Even I know Jack Cornfield, who's now very highly regarded lay meditation teacher, Buddhist teacher, but I've heard him say that, oh, back in those days when I was a monk in Thailand with Ajahn Chah, this was the late 1960s, oh, that was the happiest time of my life. Okay, so this is Sakuludayi speaking. He's speaking quite high praise of the Buddha here. So now the Buddha, in a way, he's going to test Udayi, maybe out of his own curiosity, to find out how Udayi understands the minds of his disciples. What is the reason he thinks that the Buddha's disciples honor, respect, and revere him so much? And so he asks, here I'm on page 632, paragraph 7, he asks Udayi, how many qualities do you see in me because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me? Then Udayi says that he sees 5 qualities in the Buddha which are the basis for the respect he receives from his disciples. And these are the 5 qualities that he mentions. And you see that these 5 qualities, they reflect his own, maybe his own disposition towards an ascetic way of life, rather than towards a meditative or contemplative or liberative way of life. So he thinks that the Buddha's disciples respect and revere him because the Blessed One eats little and speaks in praise of eating little. Again, he thinks the disciples revere the Buddha because the Buddha is content with any kind of robe and praises contentment with any kind of robe. Third, because the Buddha is content with any kind of alms food and praises contentment with any kind of alms food. The Buddha is content with any kind of dwelling place and praises contentment with any kind of dwelling place. And fifth, the Buddha or the Blessed One is secluded, lives in seclusion, and he praises seclusion to his disciples. So those are the 5 qualities that he sees in the Blessed One. And he assumes that it's because of these 5 qualities that his disciples revere and honor him. So what kind of unifying factor do we see in these 5 qualities? What sort of binds them together? Or how would we sort of classify these 5 qualities? Contentment is, you say, the core of them. We have here, yes, 3 of them are directly concerned with contentment. That is contentment with any robe, alms food, and dwelling place. And then you could say the other 2 are sort of exemplifications of contentment, or maybe the pursuit of ascetic qualities. That is the first, eating little, not being concerned to eat sumptuous food in large quantities, and then going off into seclusion. But does Udayi pass the Buddha's test, so to speak? What do you think if you've read the sutta? Yeah, he doesn't, yeah. And now the Buddha is going to show him in the next few paragraphs why he's wrong, why he didn't pass the test. And he does this in the form of hypotheses. So he says, suppose, Udayi, my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the recluse Gotama eats little and commends eating little. And now he says that there are disciples of mine who live every day, they just eat a cupful of food. I don't know what a cup was like in India in the Buddha's time. Maybe like a teacup. Probably so, yeah. Or even half a cupful of food. Or the quantity of food that could be put in what's called here a bilva fruit. This is in Sri Lanka the belly fruit. Belly fruit is about the size of an apple, a slightly big apple, or size of a good-sized avocado. So this would be all the food that they're eating in one day is about the size of the amount of food, probably rice and some vegetables that would be roughly equivalent to the size of an apple. Or even half a belly fruit, half of an apple size of fruit. While the Buddha says, I sometimes eat the full contents of my alms bowl or even more. Now, if you've seen the kind of alms bowls that Theravada monks use these days, especially the monks in the Thai forest tradition, you think, oh my heavens, how much the Buddha must have eaten. You know, these Thai alms bowls could be about this big. But that's because the Thai monks from the forest tradition use the alms bowl almost like a shoulder bag for when they go traveling. They put their extra robe into the bag, their toiletries, and various other things. So it's not used only for collecting food, but also as almost like a suitcase for traveling. And even the kinds of bowls that we use in Sri Lanka are quite big. They can hold much more food than one person could normally eat at a single meal. And that's generally because, well, we don't get the bowl filled up to the top, but usually just about a quarter or a third of the bowl gets filled. And this is because when we go on alms round, often we're going to collect food for sometimes 2 monks, 3 monks. So if there's a monastery, say, with 6 monks living, maybe each day 2 will go on alms round, and they'll collect in 2 alms bowls enough to feed 6 monks. And so the bowl is somewhat big. But you know, the bowl that's used by the Taiwan, I don't know whether it's used in China, but I've gotten the Taiwan bowl, which I use now. It's about this big. So it's quite reasonable, but even to eat a full Taiwanese bowl of food, it's quite I've never done it myself. Usually about a half of a Taiwanese bowl of food. So the bowls in the Buddha's day must have been quite small, not like the bowls we use today. Okay, so the Buddha eats the full contents of his alms bowl, even more, while some of his disciples are just eating a handful of food. So if the disciples were to respect the Buddha because of eating little, then they should respect his disciples even more than they're respecting the Buddha. And those disciples who are eating less than the Buddha shouldn't have any special respect for him. Okay, now comes the robe. Okay, suppose my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the Buddha is content with any kind of robe and praises contentment with any kind of robe. But now there are disciples of mine they're called refuse rag wearers. This means that they make their own robes by going around and collecting discarded pieces of cloth. Usually they get these pieces of cloth by going to, where do they get them? Dumps, but a special place, not an ordinary dump. Yeah, exactly, the charnel ground. When bodies are discarded in the charnel ground, they wrap them up in these pieces of cloth and they discard the body there. And so the ascetics of the period would go to the charnel ground and maybe with a knife and cut off strips of cloth. And then they would take them, cut them into patches, square, rectangular patches, sew them together, and then dye them the color. Usually they would use pieces of bark, pieces of wood, boil it all into a big pot to make a kind of brownish, orange-brown color, and then dye that robe and wear them. So these are called pangsukula, which means literally dust robes, or dust robes made out of dust cloth. Yeah, so it gives the explanation here. They collect rags from the charnel ground, from rubbish heaps or shops, and make them into patched robes and then wear them. But I sometimes wear robes which have been given by householders. These would be robes which are made by professional tailors under the instructions of householders who want to offer robes. So the cloth will be fine, good quality cloth. The sewing job will be impeccable. It will be dyed a quite nice color, uniform color. And so if the Buddha was praised for contentment with any kind of robe, then the real praise and honor should go to those disciples who were wearing the refuse rag robes. Okay, then comes the respect due to contentment with any kind of alms food. This is a little different from the first one, since it's concerned more with the quality of the food rather than quantity. Okay, so if the Buddha were to be praised or to be honored because he is content with any kind of alms food and praises contentment with any kind of alms food, then some of his own disciples should be praised and honored more highly than the Buddha. Because the Buddha has disciples who are called alms food eaters, pindapatikas. And this means that they make a vow not to eat any food which is especially brought to the monastery and offered to them. Or they make the vow not to accept invitations to go to houses to receive special offerings of meals prepared by householders. But rather they make the vow just to go from house to house with their alms bowl, collecting food which people will offer them at the door, and then they go either to a quiet place or back to the monastery and take their meal from the food that they collect on alms round. And some of them go on what is called, is translated here, unbroken alms round from house to house. And it's a more rigorous practice than simply going on alms round. This is the case where you make the vow to go to every house, whether one knows that one regularly gets food there or not. So, say there's a street with, say, 6 houses, and you've gone for months to those houses. At house 1, 2, and 6, they regularly offer food. But houses 3, 4, and 5, they've never offered food. But whenever one goes on alms round, one stands outside house 1, people offer, you say, Sukhi Hotu is like blessings to you. Second house, people come out, they offer some food. Sukhi Hotu, blessings to you. Third house, you stand there, generating loving kindness. May these people be well happy. Maybe the people are going about their business. Somebody looks outside, sees a monk there, pretends he doesn't see them, goes back to their business. So you just stand there for a few minutes. May you be well, happy. May all your good purposes be fulfilled. Go on to house 4. House 5, you do the same thing. Then you go to house 6 and people come out and offer the food. And you say your blessing. And you do this every time. And then sometimes it happens, you might be doing this for a month. People in houses 3, 4, 5 have never come out. Then the last day of the month, you're standing there generating loving kindness. Then suddenly the door opens up and people come out with the food and make the offering.
Is that practice still in our land? Is this still practiced in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, for monks to go on alms round from house to house, it's not so common. In Thailand and Burma, actually what's become common because people expect the monks to be going on alms round at particular times. So instead of people being in their houses, they set up like little tables outside the house, and they'll have stacks of food on the table, and then the monks come by in the line, and then they give to the people who are going by. But for this reason, I only have experience with Sri Lanka, and I used to go from time to time alms round in Sri Lanka, but it makes it so much more enjoyable than if the people are already waiting outside with their tables stacked with food. Because some of my happiest moments in Sri Lanka were like maybe you're taking a walk through the countryside and you have the alms bowl, and it's getting to be the time for the meal. Maybe we take the food usually about 11, so 11:15, you see it's getting close. You just take your alms bowl, you find the group of houses, and the people there are not expecting a monk to go by because it's not done regularly, but you just stand there with the bowl, and then it's not like the West where people close their doors, close their windows, but because it's a hot climate, the doors are usually open, people are coming in and out. Sometimes if there's little children, the children will come out and play. And so you're standing there, and then the people suddenly, they catch the sight of, what's that at the door? Wow, a monk. And they regard this as a very valuable opportunity to do a meritorious deed. For them, yeah. And so they might have some food that they're already preparing for the middle of the day, or they might have some leftovers from the previous day, which they'll say, please wait, and then they'll heat them up, and then they come out, and then they'll offer. How long did I do the alms? You see, at the place where I was staying, which was for most of the time, it was in the forest, so we didn't go on alms round every day. We had a system worked out where there would be a monastery attendant who would use a bicycle to drive into town, pick up the food in these baskets and bring it back. But at a certain point, we observed the practice of going once a week, something like that, on alms round to the village, to people to the village to collect food. But sometimes when traveling, like sometimes taking like a walk through the countryside over several days, then just bring the alms bowl along, and when you stop at houses, then just go on alms round. And it's really very, very enjoyable. And then people will always ask you, like, Heta is tomorrow? Okay. Andrew, Heta, what do you know? Venerable, are you coming tomorrow? Or Andrew, Hemadama, what do you know? Are you coming every day? Then I have to say, I'm sorry, but I'm just passing through. Can't come tomorrow. Okay, let us continue. Okay, so this was the unbroken alms round, where you go to every house without exception. Okay, so when they have gone amongst the houses, then they won't agree, even when invited to sit down. Sometimes people will invite them, please come in, sit down while we prepare the food. They'll say, we'll just wait outside. When the food's ready, you bring it and offer it. Okay, so that's what his disciples do, but the Buddha says, sometimes I accept invitations to the houses for meals, and I'll eat meals of good quality rice with many sauces and curries. So if my disciples were to honor me with the thought that the Buddha is content with any kind of alms food, then people should really honor these disciples of mine even more than myself, because they're observing more austere practices regarding food than I do. Okay, then comes the practice regarding dwelling places. So, suppose my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the Buddha is content with any kind of dwelling place and praises contentment with any kind of dwelling place. But now the Buddha says that there are disciples of mine who are tree root dwellers and open air dwellers. This means that they make the vow or the resolution that they will not live under a roof, that they won't live in a dwelling with a roof, but instead they travel around the countryside, and at night they just go to stay at the foot of a tree. They'll get some shelter from the tree, and this is still done, or at least it used to be done till recently in Thailand. You know, the big problem with living in the outdoors is mosquitoes. So in the Thai forest tradition, they have this kind of umbrella with a big canopy, and then attached to the canopy is a mosquito net. So the monks who observe this practice will, when they're settling down for the night, they'll plant the umbrella will have a kind of hook on the top. They'll attach the hook to a branch of a tree. They'll spread out the mosquito net. Then they'll sit under the umbrella meditating through the early part of the night. Then when they're ready to go to sleep, they might just spread out a mat, sleep under the umbrella, under the tree, and then the next morning they'll continue their wandering. And then some live out in the open air without even taking the shelter of a tree. And there's another practice of living in the cemeteries or charnel grounds. This is a way of testing oneself for fear. Because in South Asia, probably East Asia, there's a lot of fear of ghosts. A lot of people have. Yeah. 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 Yeah, the other day I was taking a walk around the monastery, and two of the nuns were taking a walk at the same time. And so we were walking together, and then one of them asked me, is anybody living with you in Taishu Hall? I said, no, I'm staying there alone. And they said, aren't you afraid? Yeah. Yeah, but then I said, afraid? Why should I be afraid? And the two, they sort of looked at each other, a little embarrassed. And then one of them said, ghosts? And I said, I'm not afraid of ghosts. If any ghosts come, I just tell them to sit down, and I'll teach them the Dhamma, recite some blessings for them. And
does this living outdoors and under roofs, does this include rainy season?
oh, this is the exception. I think it's mentioned here. Oh, yeah, I didn't get to finish the sentence. There are disciples of mine who are tree root dwellers and open air dwellers who do not use a roof for 8 months of the year. Yeah, so this is not during the rainy season, because the rainy season, it's very uncomfortable, and it could lead to, if one gets, and when it rains, in South Asia during the monsoons, it's not like a drizzle, it's really like heavy downpour. So you get soaked with water, and then you get sick and could die from pneumonia. So during the rainy season, then it's for the monastic order, there's a rule that one has to live in a dwelling with a roof. Okay, so this is the way some of the disciples live, while the Buddha says, while I sometimes live in gabled mansions, plastered inside and outside, protected against the wind, secured by door bolts with shuttered windows, like in the Buddha's main monasteries, the Bamboo Grove in Rajagaha, and the Jeta's Grove in Shravasti. He would have had, the people would have built nice cottages for him, and everything was quite comfortable. It's not that the Buddha wanted comfort or needed comfort, but people wanted to honor him, and so they would build nice dwelling places for him. And even, in the present day, it's quite, or at least till recently, it was quite customary that monks from the more austere forest tradition, they begin living quite very simple, austere lives, even living under a tree or living just in a simple straw hut. But then, because of their reputation, they attract many disciples, and then that little hut turns into a formal monastery, then the boundaries of the formal monastery spread till it becomes a large monastery, and then people will build a special cottage for the head monk, which looks quite luxurious. And it's not that the head monk wants luxury, but people want to honor him, and so they build very nice, comfortable cottages for them. But often they still continue to live quite austere lives. Okay, so if people were to honor the Buddha because of his simple dwelling places, then they should honor the disciples even more, who are living most of the year under a tree or in the open air. Okay, then we come to the fifth reason. So suppose my disciples honored and respected me, thinking that the recluse Gautama lives in seclusion himself and praises seclusion to others. Okay, in that case, they would be partly wrong, because the Buddha says there are disciples of mine who are forest dwellers, who live in remote dwelling places, who live in the jungle thickets, far from the busy centers of commerce, from places where people have settled. So they live deep in the jungle, deep in the forest. Even they don't live in monasteries, but maybe just in remote huts and caves in the forest. And then just if there is a Sangha community nearby, then once each half month, then they will come to join that Sangha for the recitation of the Patimokkha. That's the code of monastic rules. It's the code of monastic rules. So according to the regulations, the monks who are dwelling in a single locality are supposed to get together on the full moon and the half moon day, the full moon and the new moon days, to recite the code of discipline, the Patimokkha. Okay, but the Buddha now says that, but I sometimes live surrounded by bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, that's monks and nuns, by men and women lay followers, by kings and royal ministers, by the teachers of other sects and their disciples. So the Buddha had a very, very busy, very busy life, often surrounded. He had, part of the day the monks and nuns would come to him for instructions. Other parts of the day, probably in the early evening, he would give a public discourse, and then lay people would come to him for instructions. At other times of the day, kings like King Pasenadi, King Bimbisara, King Udana would come to him for instructions. The ministers, the teachers, the followers of other teachers would come. And so the Buddha would every day he would have several hours reserved for his own solitary meditation, usually late at night and early in the morning. But during the day, he was very busy. And his main centers were outside of Rajagaha, the capital of the state of Magadha, and Savatthi, the capital of the state of Kosala. Okay, so if people were to respect the Buddha because he lives in seclusion, then they should respect those of his disciples who are the forest dwellers even more than they respect the Buddha. And so those aren't the ultimate reasons, the real reasons why the Buddha's disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate him and live in dependence on him. Okay, at this point I'll ask whether there's any questions from anything that's come up so far. Please. Yeah, it's good if, I should also mention, everybody who wants to speak should take the microphone, and when you finish, you hold the microphone till the next person wants to speak, and then you give the microphone to them.
Yeah, two questions, sorry, they add up in my mind. One, I would love to hear more about the mindset and training for the monk as he's going to the houses that don't typically offer the food and
Yeah.
the feeling of lack of expectations and lack of expectations towards those who may often offer the food. And the second question about the issue of happiness and what was said about, this was Jack Cornfield, I think, of the happiest time in his life, and how that seems in our culture anyway to be a judgment and antithetical in a way to the Buddhist approach to evaluate something. So just sort of clarification.
Okay, let me take each question individually. Okay, the first one is to speak more about the attitude of the monk who's going an alms round towards the people in the houses who don't offer. That's the question? I mean, I can't speak for others because and there'll be a lot of diversity depending upon the individual monk. You know, some person might be grumbling and complaining in his mind, but we could say that the ideal attitude is, or should be, one of equanimity towards those, or let's say impartiality in loving kindness and compassion towards those who give and those who don't give. And so if somebody gives, of course you recite the blessing and wish them to be well and happy. If somebody isn't giving and you know that the person is aware that you're outside, but they just don't want to show themselves because they're somewhat miserly, again, one should be wishing them to be well and happy, and maybe further wishing, may they develop the mind of generosity and break free, break out of this grip of miserliness. And sometimes this mental force can have a power that can, change people for the better. And this is something that I had observed in Sri Lanka. One doesn't want to make judgments, but it's a little bit of sort of the knowledge that one gains through experience. What I found, maybe it's a little karmic warning to us. We found through experience that it's also an inside secret if you get ordained and go to Sri Lanka. The best houses for alms round, it's not the really rich people, not the really poor people, because, you want to give them the opportunity to give, and often they want to give, but sometimes they just don't have anything. But it's what we would call maybe lower middle class, or basically people who are from the farming communities, or in the city, those people who might have migrated to the city from the farming community, agricultural community, and are not living at a high, luxurious standard, but are they have sufficient food for themselves and their family, but they're not living in abundance, in luxury and abundance. because somehow they have this traditional Buddhist faith, they have the spirit of generosity, and they like to give to support those who are following the Buddhist path. But ideally, one has to have the attitude of equality or impartiality towards everybody. And I've had experiences, such varied experiences. Sometimes you go to the house of people who show themselves publicly to be, great supporters of Buddhism, and you come to the house and, they'll take a couple of, they have these small South Asian bananas and give you like 2 small South Asian bananas. Then you go to the house of a Muslim family and they'll come out with a bowl of rice, 3 or 4 different prepared dishes and put it in the bowl. It's just so unpredictable. But again, the ideal attitude is wishing equally for all of them to be well and happy, and for all to develop minds of generosity, not for one's own sake, but for their own sake. Okay, then does that deal with the first question? Then the second question, when Jack Cornfield was thinking back to the time when he was a monk, and he thought that was the happiest period of his life, naturally we consider certain times happier than others, so I don't see how that can be avoided. Even the Buddha himself towards the end of his life, when he was having so much trouble with monks quarreling and disputing, and there was small revolts in the Sangha from Devadatta and his group. He would think back to the early days of the Sangha when he would just have to give some instructions one time and everybody would follow it. And he would say those were that was the golden age of the Sangha. Now people are degenerating, we're coming to the end times. Okay, any further questions? Okay, so now we'll go on to, now the Buddha is going to explain the real reasons why his disciples honor and respect him. Okay, so they go in a kind of progressive series. So he starts off at the most basic level. He says, "My disciples esteem me for the higher virtue." This is virtuous behavior. So that the ascetic Gautama is virtuous, a virtuous behavior. He possesses what's called the supreme aggregate, or say set of virtuous behaviors. And then we see the various types of virtuous behavior of the Buddha described, for example, basically it would correspond to his description of the disciples' virtuous behavior in Sutta 27. I won't go into this now, but that he abstains from killing, stealing, he's observed celibacy, he's a speaker of truth, he speaks words which are always gentle, which bring together those who are divided. He always speaks, his speech is very meaningful, he doesn't engage in idle chatter, and various other qualities that illustrate his commitment to, say, renunciation, inner purity, harmlessness, kindness, compassion. Okay, so this is the first quality because of which my disciples honor and respect me. Okay, then the disciples esteem me for my excellent knowledge and vision. This is jnana dasana, knowledge and vision. So when the recluse Gotama says, I know, he truly knows. And when he says, I see, he truly sees. He teaches the Dhamma through direct knowledge. This is abhinya. And it's not a speculative teaching, not a teaching which he's just devised intellectually, but it's a teaching which is based on abhinya. So the word abhinya, the prefix abhi, has something of the sense of higher and also direct. So he teaches the Dhamma on the basis of a kind of higher knowledge, which is also a direct experiential knowledge. So it's not just intellectual, not just a mental or thought construction, but it's a superior realization of the truth. He teaches the Dhamma certain... Oh, you barely see it out there. Some of these markers have to be retired. Ah, this is much better. Sanidana. Nidana, sometimes it has the meaning of cause or origin. Probably here it has the meaning something like a reason. Like when he presents a teaching, he'll back it up with reasons, with proof, with evidence. And then the third phrase, it had always been something of a puzzle to me, but now I think I've understood it. Sapati haryang. Now in certain contexts, the word patiharya has the meaning of what we would call a miracle. Like ability to multiply the body so that you could see 5 versions of a person at the same time, or ability to walk on water, to sink into the earth, to rise up into the sky. That's one meaning of patiharya, but it doesn't seem to fit here, even though some translators have translated this, that the Buddha teaches the Dhamma with miracles, not without miracles. But I tried to figure out what is the meaning of this patiharya that could unite miracles, the idea of what we call a miracle, with the sense required here. And I went back to the original meaning of this word based on the verb patiharati. The word harati means to take towards oneself, whereas pati gives a sense of moving in the contrary direction, the opposite direction. So patiharati seems to mean not taking towards oneself, but pushing away, or now I render it providing an antidote, something which can strike down or eliminate. And so the Buddha gives a teaching which eliminates opposition in the sense of striking down doubts because it's reasonable or convincing. It eliminates the obstructions of the mind, the defilements. And also we could bring in the meaning of miracle under patiharya in this sense, that a so-called miracle is one which breaks down or removes our fixed conceptual framework about the way things work. So if you think that at any given time a person is in one place, not in another place, and yet you come up and from Taishu Hall where you were speaking to Bhikkhu Bodhi, and then you see he's sitting here giving a talk, you wonder, how could he be in two places at the same time? And then I say, well, I don't have any twin brothers. Then that phenomena breaks down your fixed conception that a person is in one place at one time. Or if like somebody walks across the water without falling in, it breaks down the fixed conception that a person will always sink into water if they step on it. Okay, so the Buddha teaches the Dhamma it's hard to get one word for sapatiharya, in a manner which is convincing, in a manner which is an antidote to, we would say, to doubts, an antidote to mental defilements. Okay, so this is the second quality because of which my disciples honor me. The third is that the recluse Gautama is wise, or the disciples esteem him for the higher wisdom. This is very closely connected with the excellent knowledge and vision, but it seems to be given us to have special connotations of its own. So they think the recluse Gautama is wise, he possesses the supreme aggregate of wisdom. And then this is the way this wisdom is being illustrated or explained. It is impossible that he should not foresee the implications of an assertion. So if he makes an assertion, he knows all of the implications of that assertion that others might try to draw out from it. So he won't get, in discussions with others, he won't get trapped into a self-contradiction. By somebody taking one of his statements and saying, this is the implication of your statement, and that implication contradicts another statement you made, so you're defeated in debate. Because debate, this was an important aspect of the the contemplative life in this period. Okay, so it's impossible that he should not foresee the implications of an assertion, or that he should not be able to confute with reasons the current doctrines of others, the doctrines with which he disagrees. Okay, so that is the third reason why the disciples respect him. The fourth reason is based upon, we would say, the concision and constant practical relevance of the Buddha's teaching. So when, he says, when my disciples have met with suffering, when they're victims of suffering, prey to suffering, they come to me and ask me about the noble truth of suffering. Then I explain to them the noble truth of suffering and satisfy them with my explanation. Or they might ask about what is the cause of suffering. He'll explain the cause. Is it possible to get free from the suffering? The Buddha will speak about the cessation of suffering. They'll ask, how does one get free from suffering? Then the Buddha will speak about the Noble Eightfold Path as the way to the cessation of suffering. And so we would say that this is like one of the great achievements of the Buddha, was to compress the entire Dhamma into this framework of the Four Noble Truths, which addresses the most crucial problem at the heart of the human condition, the problem of suffering. And the Buddha not only lays out very clearly the different aspects, dimensions, ramifications of suffering, but he traces suffering to its causes, to its origin. He holds out the possibility of complete freedom from suffering, and he declares in all its detail the path, the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the end of suffering. Okay, at this point I'll stop and then ask again whether there's any questions on anything brought up here. Okay, Richard, please take the microphone.
Different translations of suffering seem most appropriate to. How's, for instance, trauma?
Trauma.
Trauma, yeah. Is that a good translation of suffering?
I think trauma is too dramatic. Even suffering is not such an adequate translation of the Pali word dukkha, which can suggest degrees of dissatisfaction, which don't really amount to what we would call suffering. But any kind of degree of annoyance, dissatisfaction, irritability, discontent would also be included within dukkha.
Affliction?
Even affliction seems to me a more extreme form of dukkha. It doesn't take in so much the subtle dimensions. So I think that in the final analysis, there's no real adequate translation of the word dukkha. Some people, in fact, we've used unsatisfactoriness, which maybe it's the most accurate, but it's rather unwieldy term to use in ordinary conversation or ordinary discourse, because we don't even use the word unsatisfactoriness in the everyday English speech.
The translators use the word affliction, for I think what they mean are pretty much the same thing.
Affliction.
Well, yeah, but they're translations from French and German.
Yeah, I don't.
Affliction. And the human condition.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody has really solved the problem of translating dukkha. But Katie, did you have some comment on that?
I wanted to ask if I understand that this is the correct etymology, do and ka, like the boys that axle to the wheel that causes the cart to constantly be
I've seen that explanation, but it's what I would call an example of a playful derivation, not a literal derivation. I think ka just indicates a state, and the prefix dur usually indicates something negative, like duganda means something which is bad smelling, malodorous. Dukkata means something badly done. Dubasita means wrong speech, what's badly spoken. So dur just has the sense of what's bad, and ka is a state. But there's another word, akka, which means the axle of a cart. So they say dur akka means, was it that the axle is off balance, something like that? But it should be taken just as a playful derivation that one gets in the commentaries, not a literal derivation. I know some translators have used stress. It's one aspect of dukkha. I don't like it so much because we speak of, especially nowadays, people have a lot of stress. And so we speak about programs of stress relief. And so you think that you're following Buddhism to get as a kind of program of stress relief. But in certain conditions, it does, seem applicable. Certainly it's a major aspect of dukkha. Okay, we will stop now, and then we could have a little more discussion after we come back from lunch, say 12:15 or so. One announcement I have to make. Even though next week a class was scheduled, but I have to cancel that class. Because during this past week, I was invited to go to Washington, D.C. There is going to be a big demonstration against the practice of fracking. And part of this is going to be a meeting of what's called the Interfaith Coalition Against Climate Change. This time they'll have a special focus on fracking. And if you don't know what fracking is, it's a code word for something called hydraulic fracturing, which is the practice which these natural gas corporations are doing of pumping a mixture of water with very toxic fluids, very toxic chemical fluids, into the ground in order to break up rock formations, in order to excavate the sources of natural gas. And what happens is that these toxic chemicals that they're injecting into the ground flow into the channels where the water is flowing underground and pollute and toxify the water, so that in whole communities in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, where this fracturing is taking place, they've just lost their water supply because the water is too toxic. Children are getting these strange diseases. Mothers are giving birth to deformed children. People are getting cancer and other strange diseases. There have been videos that I've seen of people who have fracking taking place in their communities. You might have seen them. They open the water faucet, the water comes out, and they put a match to the water, and it explodes in a massive flame. And New York State is on target for fracking. So far, they've been holding off. Yeah. But I think that there's a pressure from the grassroots which is preventing him from doing it. But he's under because these natural gas companies have so much wealth, so much power that Yeah. So if anybody wants to come down, please do so. You just look for Interfaith, I think it's Alliance or Coalition Against Climate Change, or just look for Climate Change Demonstration, Washington, D.C., July 28th. Okay, so next week we won't have the class, but then in the original schedule I didn't have the class for August 4th because they call a spiritual retreat here for 3 days, but I found this going to be in Mandarin, and even if I have to give a class, I could do it in the afternoon. So we will have our class August 4th, but it will be in the library rather than Kuan Yin Hall. So I got permission to use the library for the class on August 4th. And so we'll start at, August 4th. That's the Saturday. So we'll have the class at, again, starting with the meditation, 9 a.m. We'll do it like 50 minutes till 9:50, 9:55. Then we'll follow that with a little break. Then we have the sutta class. And it seems this sutta I have to do actually in 3 sessions because it's pretty dense. It's almost like a summary of what follows is almost like a summary of the whole Dharma. So to get it all into one more session, I'd have to rush too quickly through it. So next time I'll do all of these groups that form the 37 aids to enlightenment, then the rest of the sutta, the 3rd class. Okay, any questions about the protocol? Okay, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Akasata chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mangparang Etavata Chaham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Chaham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Cham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavag Upadaya Avichihetato Etantare Satakayupapana Rupiya Rupicha Asanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Posantu Nibuting. Okay, then we end with the 3 bows, 3 short bows.
All the bumping.